Yes, thank you, and thanks for a very interesting presentation. I would love to hear more from you as well. So, but I guess we can do that later too. So I'm Marit, and Karen and I we will talk about these things to consider when using XR in research. And when thinking about this, it's really no difference in at the basics from doing research in general. So it's sort of the same aspects you have to think about, but then there are examples and things that we have to talk about and think about, and that we will discuss here or present here. So we have this stimulus organism response framework. When we do research, we are interested in seeing how observable input factors leads to some observable changes in the phenomena of interest that we have. It could be from the teacher's education, how using, like we saw yesterday with Lynn's presentation, how augmented reality will influence motivation to stay in the job as a teacher. And we are also interested in figuring out how this organism, the unobservable reactions to the stimuli, how that works in this sense. And when it comes to immersive technology or XR research, it's the stimulus are typically the technology and its features. And the organism is the experiences in using the technology, and the response is changes in, for example, learning, treatment of phobias, decision quality, and so forth. So when we talk about XR in research now today, we will discuss first this concept of validity, which is a general concept that we always have to consider when we do research in general, and it has to do with how can we approach the truth. And I think that what Rigmor said in the opening remarks today, asking how do we know that learning and training in XR are transferable to the physical world. That has to do, that is the core of validity, right? So how can we know that what we find out when we do our research is actually the truth, or that we know that how this can be transferred. And then the other aspect that Karen will talk about is the technology and how it can do for what it can do for us. So I'll start by talking about 4 types of validity that we are concerned with when we do experimental research, where we want to talk about the effects of the stimulus that we are focusing on. So validity has to do with finding the best available approximation to the truth. And we have 4 types. The first one is the statistical conclusion validity, where we can ask if the presumed independent and dependent variables are related. So this has to do with if you observe something, you can only generalize if you can say that beyond a certain probability, we can say that this is valid outside of the lab. And in terms of XR, there's a problem sometimes if you don't have enough of observations that you might get insignificant results, but that doesn't mean that what you observe is not there, so you can make wrongful conclusions about null effects. And one challenge there is this has to do with sample size. And when we do research in XR, this is particularly of a concern because it takes time with the equipment and everything. It takes a lot of time, and it also is costly research. So very often you might have very small sample sizes and you might see effects, but you cannot sort of conclude that these effects are valid. And you don't know if it's because there is no effect in the real world or actually, or if it's because we have a too small sample size. So that is one challenge and one issue to consider. Another thing that we've talked and heard a lot about is this random heterogeneity of responses. And this is why the work, for example, of our PhD candidates, me and Walter, is really important, because this is what they focus on, and also what we saw now from Rigmor and Ellen on how these differences in the eye, it's a very good illustration of this. If we don't know this, then we don't know if the effects that we observe or don't observe is because of that is how it is in reality, or if it's because of some variation between participants that we don't know about. So the research that we're doing in this program is very important, also beyond what we are doing, because it's important for other research to be done with XR. And then the second type of validity is internal validity, because even if we do observe a relationship between two factors, does that mean that can we imply causality? So is it A that causes B, or is it in fact something else? And there's many threats to internal validity. I will talk about two. Apples are not equal to pears on so many dimensions. So what are the sort of different things that makes apple different from pears? And we can also say in XR, if we're interested in learning about seeing the difference between what happens in XR versus the physical world, there's so many dimensions where this is relevant. There's so many differences between the physical world and this XR world, and can we know that it's exactly what we are focusing on that actually causes the difference? So, for example, with Lynn's research yesterday, you looked at how augmented reality, training in augmented reality can make teachers more motivated. And then you don't know if it's the augmented reality or what aspects of it it is unless you go in there and you investigate it. So these are the things that you have to consider. And the other thing is this John Henry effect. I don't know if you have heard about this, but if you have a control group that knows what they are being evaluated on. So this John Henry was a steel driver, and he was set to do a job, and his job was to be compared with an electrical steel drill, and he knew about this, and he worked so hard that he outperformed the drill, and he died from overexhaustion. And this is a very, very good example when you have a control group to compare with. Like with the medicine room that we heard about yesterday, they would have 30 participants learning in VR, and then they will have a number of participants outside of VR, and then they will measure performance before and after, which is a good setup for an experiment, right? But if the control group knows that they will be compared to those in the medicine room, they might really concentrate on working so hard that you cannot detect an effect because of that. So that's one example. So you have to consider these things when you select people to the experiments. And then the next type of validity is the construct validity, which is interesting, and I think we experienced as well in this project. If the constructs we use have clear meanings, and if we all agree that we talk about the same thing. So one good thing there is this learning. We talk about learning, and I think we spent a lot of time sharing definitions and discussing what do we mean when we talk about learning. Affordances, Karen will talk about afterwards, is another concept like that, but also perceptions and decision making and all these things. So when we talk about something and the labeling is different, then it's difficult to understand each other. Another thing is this that the cause that we assign to the observed effects can be confounded with something else. And this is an illustration of this so-called, that you might know about the Hawthorne effects, where they wanted to see how workers could become more productive, and they changed lighting and different physical features of the working environment. And then they observed that no matter what they did, if it was brighter or darker in the room, if they had the equipment or they didn't have equipment, people got more productive. So, and then then the conclusion of this was that the cause of the increased productivity was not due to the means that they put in place, but due to the attention that they got from being part of this experiment. And this is in XR also really a danger, right? Because if we invite people to participate in experiments or do things in XR, it might also be the novelty that creates the effects that we look at. So, for example, in marketing, where we're interested in looking at how what we can do to increase people's attention to something. If we invite them into an XR environment, their attention to everything might be high because of the novelty of the experience. And then we might not observe the variation that we are interested in understanding. And then the final type of validity, external validity, has to do with whether we can generalize our observations to a broader population. So this "don't judge an elephant on what a monkey can do" goes back to this heterogeneity of respondents, that we have to understand that the differences between people, and that we can only generalize to those that are sort of similar, or we have to rule out the moderating factors. And then a problem often also is this self-selection. So if you invite people to participate in a study and people volunteer to come, you might get all the people who are really interested in this XR and want to learn about it, very motivated. And then the effects that you find when you do the research has more to do with that than to the stimuli that you have presented and that you want to investigate. Yeah. So, go on.
Thank you. Okay, so we've talked a lot about training. We talked a lot about training yesterday, and but there's a lot of things that this technology can offer us. And do we really know what this technology can offer us, except for training? So that I'm going to talk a little bit about compared to what we're doing. But when we put technology into any kind of situation, and it doesn't really matter what kind of technology or what situation, we have a tendency of treating it as what can solve the world's problems. If you just drop technology into an organization, everything's going to be fine. Or if you drop technology into a classroom, we all going to learn better. But we don't really think about what's happening within that black box. So we're treating it as the tool that can save the world. And that's not necessarily the truth. That's not necessarily where we're going with this. So we know that to use technology, there's some sort of an input. There's always input into technology, then something magical happens, and then we have something coming out on the other side. And that's the outputs that we want to achieve. That's something that we want. For us here, we want our students to learn more. For business, they want to be more efficient. There's all kinds of different outputs that we want. So we need to try and open that black box. And we've talked about eyes a lot. And for XR technology, that's definitely an issue. But let's face it, there's other human factors that goes in here. We have to think about, can we move? Can we do different things? Are we able to hold the controllers? Are we able to click on the buttons that we need to click on? what are the human abilities that comes into actually taking advantage of the technology that is available. So the technology comes with a set of functionalities or capabilities, depending on what kind of word we want to use. Back to what Marit is saying, we have to agree on the concepts and what they mean. And you see here, I use both because we don't agree. And then we have the human abilities. Who can do what? Are we able to carry that headset on our head? Is it too heavy? For me, sometimes it's, and that's eyes, but I can't situate it correctly so I can see clearly. So I keep going like this all the time. But to be able to we have to put those two things together to be able to utilize the technology that is available. So, and I like the fact that we had Signal Vivo here yesterday to talk about this, because they are using this technology in a setting that it's not made for. So we are, and I've done a lot of work on people with disability, and it's different. And you can say that, yeah, but we can use this to communicate, and we can use this, and everybody can do that. But for this group particular, it's more important because they don't necessarily have that opportunity in everyday life. If anybody saw the Nyhetsmorgen this morning on NRK, they were talking about people with disability not being allowed to make decisions on their own life. Because we as a society have decided that because if you're disabled in one area, you are disabled in every area. So we have to take these things into consideration. And this is where I bring in affordance. And affordance theory is not new. And it was J.J. Gibson. He defined it as action possibilities latent in an environment, which means that anything that we use, any environment, this room, for instance, give us possibilities to use it in one way or another. A chair, that is an awesome one for this. It gives us the ability to sit, if you can sit. But it also gives you the ability to stand on it if you need to reach something. So it has different things that it gives you the opportunity to do that we didn't necessarily think on when we designed it. But he also said, actually, he talked about insects and animals when he talked about this. So rock out there to us is a rock, but for an insect it could be housing. So that's the what he's talking about. But he also says that it's equally dependent on the environment and the physical abilities of the individual or the user. And for us talking about technology, a lot of times we make assumptions of the user, but we kind of have to start thinking about an actual user instead of a thought of user. And then there's social affordances, that is the social practices that the technology gives us the opportunity to do. So for people with disability that for some reason have people deciding if they are able or not able to use the technology, and not then just get access, they may get a new place to meet other people, to participate, to be engaged. And these are the things that we need to think about here. Okay, so affordance, a door handle. Most of us know how to deal with a door handle. We walk up to a door, we assess what it looks like, and then we decide if it goes inwards or outwards, pull or push. And this one up here is very clear, right? You have a handle to pull, and you have just a plate to push. Not so necessarily so clear about these ones, right? But we do know that when you get one of those, you have to turn it. to open, because you can't just push or pull, then it won't happen. You have to turn. And the handles that we usually use here in Norway, where it's actual handle, it's in us how it works. But how about this? If it didn't have words on it, it's either way. And how many of us haven't stood there trying to open a door, not knowing which way it goes? So that's another example of affordance. And it has to do with how do we perceive it. And that's individual. As much as we talk about affordance as something that can be offered for a group, it's still individual. Because it's dependent on what I can do or what you can do. So we can see it as how and when action possibilities are available or unavailable for a specific actor. So we've all tried to teach grandparents to do things. For instance, with a phone. My grandfather, he had a clear moment at one time, because he looked at me and said, "Karen, you want me to have a TV where I can actually put the card inside the TV so I don't have two remotes, don't you?" And I, yep, that sounds about right, because then I don't have to teach you two remotes, just one. But it doesn't matter how many times I show somebody something if they can't use it. So if you show your grandparent how to send an email on an iPad, which is something that we all do, if they can't do it, who cares? It doesn't matter that the capability is there if they can't take advantage of it. And then, of course, there's critics for this theory, which makes sense, because it is fluent. It's in transformation all the time. And to me, that's some part of the beauty of it, but at the same time, that is also what makes it hard to deal with. But we have identified within the information systems field 4 ways of using affordance theory. And then we're talking about canonical affordances. This is something where it's very clear. It's a socially accepted construct of how an object can be used, how a technology can be used. And a chair is one of those. We all know a chair is for sitting. Nobody questions that. And if they do, oh well, people will argue from here to everywhere. And then you have a potential affordance. Well, we could start with the embedded affordance. That is designed. There's a designer on one end. When we make technology, hardware, software, it doesn't really matter, that we have thought of a user, we assume that this user can do this, this, and this, and this, and then we create the technology by those thoughts. And the designer has decided that this is how it's going to be used, and in this order. Independent of talking to somebody, actual physical people. And then you have the potential affordances, which is actually where we as users of the technology perceive that there is a possibility to do something. And most of the information systems research land in that box. Because a lot of times we can look at an object or a technology, and XR is one of them, where we understand that there's possibilities here. We can see that this can be useful. But then there's an issue of transferring it into actual use. And that's the enacted affordance, where we are actually using it. So me using this, and that's like low tech, right? But I can click here and I can point. But if I wasn't able to use my thumb to point, to click that, who cares? It's not useful. But I can understand that it's there, so then it would be a potential for us. And reason why I bring this up is because we think about the technology in certain ways. We have an idea of what this technology can do for us. We have all of us have a worldview that we bring with us all the time. We just don't necessarily have the same idea of what that actually means when we talk to other people and when we put the technology into action. The only thing that we agree on technically when it comes to these different stances is this is a relational thing. It's a relation between the technology and the individual or the human that is supposed to use it. So we can't deny that there's an existence of affordances. You can call it something else if you want, but we have to remember and recognize that the user, if the user can't use it or can't see that it's there, it's meaningless to that user. And we have to think about these things. And I envision this a huge thing for XR, but I think human ability, can we move? How can we move? Can we click? Can we use this? There's, for instance, the Signal Vivo people that they were talking about yesterday, they will feel things, probably feel sound more than hear sound. And what does that mean? Some of us can sit and use the technology, but how is that experience? Is that experience as good? Will we, like we now have Zoom fatigue, will we get XR fatigue eventually? There are different things on how the human, with the technology, how we do this and how these things come out. We believe that there is facilitating conditions. And by facilitating conditions, I mean things that we do or are available to us that makes it so that more people can use the technology. So that could be training. We can train somebody to use the technology. So that will be, the training part will be a facilitating condition in using the technology. It could be that we are now able to switch the distance for the lenses, right? That will be a facilitating condition so that more people can use this technology. And we can't get past it. Universal design is coming to take us all. So we have to think about how are we going to facilitate that the technology is usable for as many people as possible. Yes, I don't know how long I've used, but I think there's time for questions and answers and possibly answers. Yes. Do we have time?
Yeah, we have time, 15 minutes.
Yeah. But it's clear. You're okay.
Thank you very much. I didn't see the first half, but in your view, if we're talking about affordances, it's easy to understand physical ones, but there are also mental affordances, or we can have mental disabilities that makes us not capable of making use of the affordances of the technologies.
Yes.
And in that aspect, there is also the you could train if you use the technology, your perception of its affordances will grow, right?
Yeah, most likely. Yeah.
So when you're looking at affordances, is this aspect there as well, or is it more in the physical?
No, it's both. It's all our abilities, and a lot of times if you bring a cognitive issues, that is, the technology is very often too complex, and that's also a problem. To be able, for people with intellectual disability, that the technology is very often, there's too many cues, there's too many things happening at one time. there are too many channels to communicate. You can communicate in writing, or you can communicate in words, or you can, and you can have many channels going on at one time. So suddenly there is no use at all, because you get overwhelmed and you have to just go away from it. So it's on every human ability.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be any disabilities there.
No.
Because you see, going from in-classroom teaching, online teaching, a lot of teachers go like this, I don't understand because it's too much.
True. Oh yeah. So that all of this is it's, and that's why I'm saying that as much as we can think of these as group things, group affordances, group capabilities, or something that is a functionality that's available for everybody, it's all dependent on the individual that is supposed to use it. So it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't matter that you think online teaching is awesome. I can't stand it, because I can't stand those black boxes and not have humans to talk to, right? So it's how we perceive the technology and how we perceive what it can do for us.